Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the US population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good afternoon, Ashley Brown. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Scott Osborne. I am good. I am, even though, you and I are both kind of fighting the end of a long week.
But it's a sunny day in Florida. We've been
Yeah.
dumped on. This is typical tropical rainy season, and today is sunny, so that's always a little energy boost in my world. So that's nice.
It is. And even though I'm excited to kind of recap what we talked about on the last episode, but I'm really excited about the conversation today too, because it kind of gets to the root cause of the root cause.
We need root causes somewhere in our title when we redo the show. And actually, I thought of a few things after our last show that we could actually throw in here that we forgot to mention. But so our last show was about women in the skilled trades. We had Stu Hoffman, who's an expert on this, gave us a wealth of information, and we provided even more in the show notes about why there are not more women. What I think she said, 4% of all.
4%.
Right, and that's construction, manufacturing, utilities, transport, 4% of those workers, and it's about 30% or close to 30% of the US economy. So think about that whole swath of the economy. And I guess that's why we often talk about so much of the service economy is female and so much of this, yeah. And what's interesting is that those jobs tend to pay better than many retail, food service, nursing home, etc. jobs, which are more stereotypical female. So
occupational segregation.
That's the thing.
I know. Well, and that kind of ties into where we're going today, which is gender boxes.
Gender boxes, all right. And before we dive into gender boxes, which we will, we didn't mention, I know Sue talked about this group called Turner Construction, and people might want to look it up. Apparently they are doing extremely well. I always like to talk about bright sides, that they are really working to bring in skilled workers of both genders and break down some of those boxes, especially because apparently there are shortages. I certainly know where we are in the Sarasota Manatee, there's a huge shortage of people to do skilled carpentry, all of the cabinetry work. I talk to them a lot. I know some people in that business, and they're like, we can't find people. We are so far out. If you call them today, they'll say, we can maybe get you in for a cabinet in, mid 2026 or something.
Oh, geez.
So, they say we just can't get enough labor. So that's an interesting example of a skilled trade in our area that people that also clearly says not enough men are going into, not enough people, forget gender, are going into some of these trades these days. So that's a whole issue itself.
We ran out of time and didn't get to spotlight some of the good things happening within that space. And then I would encourage any listener who has either a personal interest in it or they know somebody, that there are lots of opportunities locally to get even apprenticeships, paid trainings, those types of things, if that's of interest of a career path. So there's lots of opportunity and lots of jobs.
There we go.
I know. So there we go.
So gender boxes.
Gender boxes. So we talk about socialization a lot, and that was talked about in certainly the getting more women in trades and how early it really starts to not to, oh, this is just too cheesy, paint you into a box.
Which color is the box? Yes. And it's funny, I suspect for women, anything over middle age, we sort of thought that some of those stereotypes were being erased. There was an era when we thought that we didn't need those stereotypes quite so much, and that we were letting some of the more harmful ones especially disappear. But we seem to be back. I certainly have watched, talking about how early it starts, watching the whole gender reveal phenomena come into during my lifetime. That for one, for me, I'm amazed by. I totally understand that how a family wants to have a celebration. They're expecting a child. That's a fun time for so many couples. Wonderful, delightful. I don't want to be a party Scrooge, but the notion that what is so this child is not even born and we're already boxing them, and that drives, think about all the things that that drives, that what's in people's minds. Oh, it's a girl. Oh, it's a boy. And then you see emotions conjured up around that, so much because we have these stereotypes. If it's a boy, they'll do these things and talk this way and wear these things, and if it's a girl, she'll talk this way and do these things and wear these clothes, and those two sort of don't meet, which I personally have never quite understood, even before I started studying it.
Well, and the color, it's either going to be pink or blue because those are obviously the only colors appropriate for each gender,
Yeah.
right?
And I do a lot with educators, and I've given workshops for educators where we talk about how they can be influential in the classroom because it does start so early. And I want to say from the outset that biology, of course, is a factor. It is
Mhm.
not nothing. But we know from so many studies and so much research that socialization is huge. It is not just biology that drives women to have shorter hair and men to absolutely, I'm sorry, women to have longer hair and wear makeup and men to have shorter hair and not wear makeup. I mean, this is not biology. These are the kinds of performing gender that we have created in our modern society. And that's what is locking us in sometimes to roles that don't serve us. So it's not just biology, but if you work in the education field, you see it so early, and often people think that, they'll say, well, boys are this way or girls are this way, but they don't realize how early the socialization starts. And they have done studies. Sorry?
I want to stop just for a quick second because I think sometimes you and this is our world. Like we're in this world and we're talking about it a lot. So it seems obvious what socialization is and what we mean by it, but just for just the education of when we're talking about socialization, what do you mean at the base level?
Okay, what I mean, and this is not a dictionary definition, but as
Mhm.
we talk about it, it's how all of these social forces, how we talk, our parenting, our educational systems, all of those things shape our behaviors, our way of speaking, our preference for careers, our preference for toys, everything that we do practically.
Mhm.
It's so how all of these malleable forces in our society are shaping and creating, as we often talk about, then kind of put us in those stereotypical boxes that may or may not suit us. If I say, well, your name is Ashley, so therefore you should only be doing a job that involves dog walking because that's my stereotype, I've kind of put you in this box that may have no relationship to reality. So socialization are all those forces that act on, in this case, we're talking about a young person, but act on all of us.
Yeah.
And we can talk about some examples later, but people who study gender and society talk about, kind of the woman box and the man box and what gets put in there and the things that we identify that we almost don't think about now. It's just so implicit in our society that we almost don't see it, which is fascinating. But they have studies to go back to children about how the different ways people talk to infants, boys and girls, the tone of voice that is used once they're toddlers and small children's, the way there's physical affection, the way girls and boys are, I will say, disciplined but redirected differently, the acceptance of misbehavior or not, the acceptance of crying or not, that boys are discouraged from crying. So many social cues go on like that. And it's in movies, it's in pop culture. Again, it's people almost just think it's the default. But if you step back and look at it, you realize that we've basically made these things up. That said, I'll pick on one that boys really shouldn't show emotion. That's a really
Mhm.
strong one. And
No crying.
or crying, that's an
No
extreme. We
crying. Yeah.
sometimes say, social scientists say that men are not allowed to show any emotions except anger. Anger is acceptable. Think about our mass media. Think about all of the action films. Think about what you see men doing, and then compare it to what you usually see women doing in films. They're talking to one another, they're caring, there's all this communication of a different sort. So typically boys are discouraged, not encouraged from those kind of social skills and those kind of communication skills. And you might think it's not so important when they're young children, but all of these things, when they're walked out to adulthood, then can give us problems that I will say don't serve all of us. This is not just a women versus men. It probably doesn't serve all of us. I will ask you, challenge you to ask any man above middle age if he would love to have a relationship, let's just say that's close with his children or
Hmm.
nieces or nephews or have emotional conversations with friends. I guarantee you they will say they would want to. And many of them will struggle with it. Surveys show men have fewer friends, often have less deep conversations with those friends. I can't say that's serving them as humans.
Right. Well, and not to go dark, but the suicide rate, right?
Suicide rate for men is 4 times for women in America. I mean,
Right.
that's tragic. That's tragic for all of us. Now, obviously, there's many things that drive mental health issues. Some of the reason actually that men tend to be more, I will say, successful, which is a dark thing in suicide, is because they tend to also have access to weapons and means of suicide that's successful. So that's another interesting stereotype played out. But mental health issues are certainly a concern.
Right.
Um, Women are put in their own box,
Mhm.
certainly. And women, I don't know, we've talked about this in other settings, so I think you've heard by now what the most important thing that women are socialized to think is most important for them as a woman, what it is to be and what's most important.
Well, and
We know.
you called out a whole room. We were Scott participated in a great panel at an Equality Day event, and you called everybody out on the conversation snippets you overheard of what's my hair look like, or I have wrinkles, or so it's appearance, right? So,
Women are socialized very, very deeply that what's most important is their appearance. And nobody comes out, usually don't come out and say that, though it's possible. But if you look at how the emphasis on clothing and hair and colorful bows in their children, and just a whole panoply of things, and body shape. I mean, they have very large numbers of girls in some sectors at young ages, 10, 12, 13, will say they're unhappy with how their body looks from an
mhm,
early age. So dissatisfaction with a normal body, that they want to lose weight. Certainly, we've seen an explosion of young girls in the market for makeup and face care. I mean, that's a
mhm,
huge business in this country.
right.
So we have girls who are very much seeing that as what's important to the world. Again, I have no objection to people looking anywhere they want, if their hair is important to them, etc. But when we consistently are giving the message that that's what I would call your calling card to the world is your appearance, that's a very vulnerable place to be in. First of all, we all age, our appearances all change. There's a lot of it
Mhm,
we have no control over. And, it drives a whole economy, making women feel inadequate, insecure, that what they bring to the table of life, of partnership, of workplaces is their appearance.
mhm,
I also want to say it's not just bad for the women, but it's bad for our society. We want the best out of every
right.
person, and that's not really doing it. I also think it's harmful because on this appearance topic, our media then will pick up on it. I think we've talked in another conversation about women in leadership and getting to elected office and how often the media will query women candidates. And this is all media. This isn't left or right. Query women candidates about their looks, or they'll judge their dress or their clothing style. Is it pantsuits? Is it not? Is it a kitten heel? Is it something else? The
Mhm,
all up and down. And I find myself thinking, well, clearly those are not key considerations for their elected office. Whether she's wearing kitten heels or flats, I don't think
right.
of how someone is a governor, for example. Our media focuses on that, but we all, including women, focus on that. So I think it's that kind of stereotyping, that kind of boxing that really doesn't serve us at all well. And we see it in a lot of right up to the moment impacts. We see it certainly in occupational choice. If women think that there's
Mhm.
certain kinds of jobs that are suitable for them, or certain kinds of jobs that are suitable for men. My guess is there are probably many men who would like to be elementary school teachers, for example. And the stigma that is associated with that has to be very powerful. I empathize that that would be hard. And
Well,
women, as
care economy. I mean, we talk about the
we talk
care
about this a lot.
economy all the time, and
Yeah.
that sometimes in a household, it might be a better choice for the man to be the primary caregiver And whether that's by the earning potential or just their natural disposition, and that's seen as an impediment to the man, like that's weak in some way that they're choosing to focus on caregiving, right?
And there's so much implicit bias, and I would say there's implicit bias not only from other men, but from women as well. I sometimes talk to older women, maybe they're not raising their own children, but I say, if you have a son or a son-in-law who chooses to do caregiving, would you see it the same? Quick, in your gut, how would you feel about it? And would you display that? And I have talked to men about who are primary caregivers, especially for young children, who talk about how hard it is to, other women in the playground or in the carpool line to form some of those relationships that are part of what it means to be a caregiver. You have to work
Mhm.
these networks, you have to arrange play dates, that sort of thing. And some, find care, find doctors, all those networks, how much they feel cut out of it because it's so female centered. So that's an implicit bias, which is not helping any of us. I would say it's
Right.
certainly not getting the best care for our children.
Right. And I think we're in an interesting period right now for many reasons, but this pendulum swing and this the really being over masculine. And I'd love for you to talk about some of the things we're seeing that's kind of just causes you to scratch your head of like what's happening on the national stage. And we talked about this when elected officials or people in power that strong masculine energy is perceived as a leader. But it feels
Yeah.
like we're getting a little
We're kind of having
performative.
I hesitate to call it a backlash, but yes, many people see this pendulum kind of swinging. That there was an era where women entering the workforce and changing roles at home and dress styles and so many of this kind of coding seemed to relax a lot. And now we're very much in a place where more, I would call them traditional gender roles with firmer distinctions. This is what men do and talk like and look like, and this is what women do and talk like and look like. We're definitely in an era in the US and in some other places where there's a kind of a swing back toward that again for a lot of reasons, political, some backlash, some religious influences. We could pick all those apart, but there definitely is a swing back. We see it certainly in American politics and leadership circles. We've had um, displays in the current administration of what is it? Who is the wrestling group? The UFC, I think it
Right,
was.
right, right, right.
Um, we have comments by major corporate leaders like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg sort of challenging each other to a brawl, which to some of us just feels like very childlike, but that sort of masculine coding, that's so-called dominance behavior
Hmm.
that is very deeply embedded in the so-called male box, is those kind of struggles for dominance. And you would think that a brawl between the two of them shouldn't really affect their corporate stock prices or anything else, but this is what we were encouraged to look at. And there's definitely also a swing on the female side of some women, certain public figures, feeling they need to dress a certain way.
Hmm.
Maybe it's long hair, shorter skirts, a certain body type, and tag in conversations traditional feminine interests and
Hmm.
behaviors, whether it's cooking or food, but just sort of to take them out of some of the other conversations about perhaps economics or policy. So we definitely are seeing a time of backlash toward let's get these traditional gender boxes down again. Many of our current elected leaders have talked very explicitly about that. Um, there's certainly currently a fear for anything that smacks of gender fluidity, which is
Hmm.
again, whether it be drag shows or anything else, things that what I call play with these boxes, for many people is threatening, whether or not it affects their own personal life. If there's a drag show, in another town, it probably doesn't affect their personal life, relationship, work life, femininity or masculine, but it's seen as threatening to these traditional boxes. And many people have grown up with them, and as I say, they just almost see it as implicit. It's part of the air we breathe and the water we drink. So it's scary when people decide they want to change some of those. And again, I
Mhm.
would say most people are not changing their biology. They're just trying to say, do we need these stereotypes? Do we need to be so firmly embedded in these baskets? But that is seen as very challenging for many people. It's
Mhm.
certainly threatening. I want to say one little bit about where this comes from. Um, we've had patriarchies with traditional roles for thousands of years.
Mhm. Mhm.
Really only in the last 100 to maybe 50 years, especially, that we've had a lot of dramatic changes to that, especially in America, Europe, a few other parts of the world. Um, Women and men have been able to access no-fault divorces so they could,
Mhm.
change marriages differently, certainly access to much more free and safe and affordable birth control, meaning couples were controlling their fertility. Women have been able to access banks and credit, so they have more economic power than ever before. And that's just in the last 50 years, and certainly moving into workplaces and places of education. So that's very, very recent, in historical social change.
Right.
So, and that is not at all to say I disagree with. I approve of all those things. I think individuals should have all those rights, but people's social behaviors don't change that quickly. All of our major global religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, etc., tend to have traditional gender roles that fit these. And that is a very much a reinforcing factor. It's not the only one, but it certainly
Mhm.
is. Not that people don't have the right to practice and believe whatever religion they want, but both from scripture and leadership roles in these religions, you see
Mhm.
reinforcement for that. So it's deeply wed into many factors of our society. There's no question.
Well, and I think that that makes a really good point of when change happens, it's hard no matter what. Like
Mhm.
people really don't love change always because you've got to change some of your ideology or how you view things. So I think having recognition of that, and you think of little moments that kind of served as a tipping point, and something that was on our run of show notes that I was like, this was one, the pronouns.
Mhm.
When it became very normal for when you were on Zoom calls or that it was these are my preferred pronouns. I think that was something that just was a moment that bugged people, right? That it's such an interesting response of like, why does it matter to you? Like
It's
what?
often misunderstood too. And then, of course, politicized. And once things get inflamed on the internet, it never helps understanding. I think
Right.
many people misunderstood that people were just choosing on any given moment if they wanted to be male or female, which was really not the point at all. It
Correct.
was really a way of saying how they wanted to be identified. And more deeply, it was saying, I'm okay with you getting outside the box if you want to. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean, quote unquote, changing their gender. It just means they want to blur the lines of those boxes. They don't want to be seen that these are my accepted and approved ways of speaking, jobs, ways of dressing, et cetera, et cetera. It means they want more flexibility in those. And this is why you see it, especially, I know many people talked about why you get kids in elementary and middle school when they first become aware of this. The vast majority of young people in those age groups are not trans. They're not trying to change their biology. They're trying to say, I want out of these boxes. I want to be able to pick and choose what's right for me. They may be very comfortable being there biologically origin gender, male, female, whatever. I don't know anything about their sexual orientation, but
Right.
they're just saying, can I have some flexibility in things like what I wear and how I talk and the music I listen to, even, is it Taylor Swift versus somebody else? Does everything have to be coded male and female? Can't I, as a human person, pick my interests and my clothes and my music and my career path from what's best for me? Even if I'm 100% male or female, I want to pick from across those boxes. And I
Right.
think that's the thing that many people misunderstand. And I think, I hope, is our source of the future. If we can get people to understand, we just want to break down some of those stereotypes and let people be their best selves. It would probably be good for those people. It would probably be good for society. We need the best of every person, in my opinion.
Right. Well, and when you look at long-term impacts of socialization, and for women in particular, because, we are a woman's place, of when we look at occupational segregation, to go back to that, if you were, and I remember my parents very well meaning, one of their comments as I, learned to set a table well, of what a good wife I would be.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to be a spoiler alert. I'm not a great wife. I'm not a good grocery shopper. I'm not a good, yeah. But it was
And
like,
when you say that, you're exactly referring to that box, that that's what a wife, quote unquote, is supposed to do.
exactly. And that the reality is I'm a great partner and, all of those things. And I'm a great support to my husband, as is he with me. So, but it's so interesting of, that's just an example of, if you're female and you're good at math, you might become a nurse, or you're not going to go engineering, or that piece, which then goes to gender wage gap, that then is the asset gap, all of the things we talk about that hinder women in building economic success and a life rooted in stability, and bringing all of society up. This is a really big fundamental piece of where it starts and where we can change it, right?
Absolutely. And again, just to stress how it's not really good if we want what's good for all of society. I mean, I would challenge you to ask a lot of people how they felt about their mother and if their mother was a good mom. I know a lot of people who say my mother was a terrible mom. I
Mhm.
don't feel that way personally, but a hell of a lot do. And it's like that was not a good fit. But because some woman was like, here's your role, they were
Mhm.
not happy with that, and they were not good at that. So I would ask, does that serve anyone? Really? So putting people in these pre-assigned boxes and roles really does not permit us to bring out the best in people. And a little more fluidity of stereotypes
Mhm.
and ways that we condition people. Can you talk well? Can you show your emotions? Can you not? Do you have to manifest how your body looks? I mean, all these things, if we would loosen up the gender roles around those, I just think we would all thrive more.
No, I agree. And what just an interesting conversation that I can continue for another half hour, but we are coming to the end of our time. We're coming to the end of our time. I want to thank you for always bringing thoughtful conversation, and looking forward to listening to this on one of our partners, WSLR, maybe.
I hope.
And there's links to things in the show notes. I think we'll keep linking our Equality Day
Yes.
panel, because there's lots of cross references here. But thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Ashley.
I
Until
know.
next time.
Until next time.